We just love talking about books. It's all good.
I do love talking about books. Welcome to the Price Writer podcast with Catrin, Townsend and me, Jeremy Keating. Join us as we explore the world of insurance-related books. We're going to offer our insights, recommendations, and also our thoughts on how to apply a wide range of books to insurance pricing roles. So in today's podcast, we are going to talk about the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni and talk about how these actually manifest in technical teams. So, hi, Catrin.
Hi, Jeremy.
Hello, it's good to see you. And welcome to the Relaunch Price Writer podcast. I say it's relaunch because we have got new branding and we're going to focus solely on books at the moment. So both Catrin and I read a lot of books. So it's a great topic for us to cover. And we think there's lots of insight that we can bring from the wide range of books that we read that's applicable to insurance pricing and the work that people are actually doing day to day. So that's why we think the pricing community will enjoy our new podcast.
Yeah, not just enjoy, but hopefully find it really beneficial and practical in the day job. I often found, particularly when I'm reading business books, there's all this hype about it. It might be a bestseller or something, but it just doesn't feel applicable to insurance pricing. Or you read it and you think, oh, that would be great if I was in marketing or self-employed. But how can I apply it to a team where we're very objective, we're very data driven, we're very highly regulated? So, a big part of this podcast is not just recommending books, but also suggesting the application, suggesting the takeaways that you can put into practice, even in insurance.
I think that's really valid. I have often found the most useful tips, tactics, strategies, and so on from very unexpected books, not books you'd necessarily think to yourself, oh, that's going to be useful for insurance pricing. So I have read quite a few of the biographies and autobiographies of the Pythons, so Monty Python. Particularly, I like Michael Palin and Eric Idle. And Eric Idle tells a brilliant story about when they were making Life of Brian. So he was friends with George Harrison, the Beatle. So George Harrison came out to the shoot to hang out with his friend. And Eric Idle was like, oh, I'm finding it really hard, George, because I'm trying to get my material across, but trying to work with this lot, there's so many egos. And George Harrison turned around and looked at Eric Idle and said, you want to try going in the recording studio with Lennon and McCartney? And I just think that's a wonderful way of learning about how to manage egos and projects as well. So ask yourself, am I trying more to put my work across, or should I step back and let other people do their work? So it's a simple things like that that you pick up from books that are really unrelated to insurance, but can be really helpful. From stories like this is how I've learned to manage teams. And Catrin, you've recently read the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which is also about how to manage people and manage teams well. So what's the book about?
Yeah, so the key idea is that there are only ever 5 reasons why teams fail. And to invert that, high performance teams always show these attributes that all build on each other. So it's usually illustrated as a pyramid. The base of the pyramid is trust. And in the book, they use this illustration of they've got this team of about 8 people and how you can increase trust through team building exercises and talking about your childhood. But realistically, if you're in a pricing team of 50 or even 120 people, and Jeremy, you've been in big teams before,
Yeah.
how can you build trust?
It's true. It is hard to build trust in teams. And you actually almost start with a deficit of trust when you run a big team. So naturally, you've things that you can't share. So you're often privy to private information about the company and the direction of the company, or private information about people in your staff and people that work for you that you obviously have to keep personal and so on. So it can be quite difficult even to start building trust in that way. I find one of my biggest advice for building trust is actually trying to be open and vulnerable myself and honest about my own struggles. So I've talked about this quite often before, but I found being a department head quite difficult the first time I did it. And I'm usually quite open about that with people that work for me and with the wider team. I like to signal that I do not have all of the answers, even though I am the leader. So, and one of the ways of doing that is by saying, look, I had these problems as well. If you've got these problems as well, that's why. It's quite good to, a really good tip for this is about reciprocation. So if somebody comes to you and tells you that they've got a particular problem, it's good, firstly, listen, take it on board, and often repeat it back to them in a way that seems like a question. So this is a very good sort of tip just for conversation generally. And then lead into a story that reciprocates. So what you don't do is one up them. Okay, so that's a mistake that people make. So don't one up them. Reciprocate with something that's happened to you and do so emotionally and make sure they know how you felt about that situation. And then they feel more comfortable sharing how they feel as well. Because often building trust is about aligning emotionally with people as much as it is about the sort of cerebral side. I think one of the things to be careful not to do, be careful not to end up with things like appraisals and one-to-ones just being about dirty laundry as well. It's about building trust with people through vulnerability.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? That it's a very soft skill, really connecting emotionally there. I have a bit more practical tips, but I like to build trust by always saying exactly what I'm going to do, and then doing it. So always make sure that you are doing what you said you can do, even if that means you have to under promise but over deliver. Because I think then people really appreciate that they can trust you to do a job, and also that they trust that you haven't forgotten about them just because you've given them a long wait time to do that task. And I think as well, having a shared goal can really help build team trust.
Yeah.
You know, if you all say that you want to focus on profitability, but then another team over there chases a segment that's really unprofitable because they want to grow, then that does erode trust. Do you think, why am I working so hard over here to gain profitability if they're just going to throw it all away on growth? And so I think making sure you are all aligned, and I know the word aligned gets used quite a lot in companies, but making sure that you really all do have a shared goal. And actually, that brings us on to the next stage of the pyramid, which is fear of conflict. So if you can't have that real conversation with a person or a team, or at least maybe expect your manager to have that conversation for you about why didn't that team stick to the profitability goal, why didn't they stick to the shared goal that we all agreed on, then that issue, that lack of trust, is never going to be resolved. And so this is what Lencioni calls artificial harmony, where we all know what the real issue is, don't we? But we're going to pretend it's fine because we don't want to be seen as a disruptor. We don't want to be seen as a troublemaker. We want to be seen as collaborative. But actually, by having this artificial harmony that papers over the cracks, all it does is it erodes the trust, and it means that we're not fully working as a team.
I do find having a clear strategy across the team does make sense. So it's something I write about in my book particularly, but just actually making sure that people understand how they do their job in the same way. And it's frustrating in big companies, I think, because you will see a list of values and probably trust is one of them, and there'll be some text next to it. But do people really live that? And that's often a big question for me. How do you really achieve that? And I do think they link together quite nicely. I think it's a really good point talking about the whole fear of conflict, because people should be able to disagree. So we are all clever people. We should be able to have conversations in which we say, actually, my opinion's this, it's slightly different to yours, and do so in a constructive way. But I actually think where we fall down on this is not that we don't disagree, it's that people often aren't really very well trained in how to disagree with people in a good way. Most of us spend 8 years probably learning maths in some way, but we don't spend even 5 minutes being taught, here are some tips when you disagree with someone, how to get your point across. So actually just beginning by saying this is a really simple tip. Just begin when you are about to disagree with someone, just begin by saying, I think differently, or anything that signposts that they are about to hear from you something that's different to their own opinion, can be quite effective in just opening people up. I mean, hopefully they won't go into a defensive mode. But again, you can actually, once you get good at these things, just even starting with that, engaging their reaction, gives you a good idea where the conversation's going to go right up front. And actually just working and feeding off of how people are reacting and their own emotions. It's something we are not taught to do, but it's something that really makes disagreeing so much easier. If I can use kind of the word easier. And over time, you will develop the ability to speak with people more frankly. Once you get used to it, once you develop a rhythm and you get on and you work out how to do so in a way that's respectful, typically you will find that it becomes easier and you can disagree in often quite a frank but often quite a kind way. What's the next step, Catrin?
Yeah, so the pyramid goes on that if you've got this fear of conflict, then that will create a lack of commitment. And part of that reason is because if you're not actually going to hold each other accountable when you don't do what you said you were going to do, then you're not going to want to be committed to stuff, because why should you do your thing if someone else is maybe not going to do their thing? And then that in turn then creates an avoidance of accountability. So it becomes more about that you're all right, Jack, rather than a good outcome. And so the top
Okay.
of this bad news pyramid is low standards. And so the idea is that poorly performing teams have no trust, that
Yep.
creates fear of conflict, which creates lack of commitment, which creates avoidance of accountability, which ultimately drives these low standards. Because no one's really in charge of any one
Yeah.
project. No one wants to be in charge, because if it all goes wrong, it's going to be dumped at their door. And if there's no trust, then you're going to think everyone's going to use that against you, even if maybe they wouldn't be. But it's really interesting how this pyramid kind of builds and builds and builds, and until you actually get the low results that that no one wants. So almost going back to your point about George Harrison, when the team has more of a focus on ego than results, on me being right rather than a good outcome, or a political land grab where you don't want that person to have this project for your own agenda, then that's really difficult. But it starts at this bottom of the pyramid, that building trust and having constructive and open conflict or dialogue or challenge, whatever you want to call it, that's so important, because Lencioni says in his book that that's the foundation of everything else. And it really resonates with me in the teams that I've been in historically. You know, when things haven't been going well, you see almost this pyramid crumble down to that issue.
I must admit, I think it's quite a good model. I think those 5 levels make sense to me. I do try and build trust with people as a foundation. I do think there's sort of upwards from that. You can't really disagree with people in a way that will be well received unless they trust you. So there's a saying, isn't there, that you shouldn't take criticism from people you wouldn't go to for advice. And I think that's fair. If you haven't built trust with people, you probably won't listen to them when they disagree with you. But I do, and I actually see it could be applicable in areas other than just teams and big companies, actually. That's not a bad way of thinking about other relationships in life. with other people and more widely. So would you recommend it? Do you think I should read it?
I'm actually going to say probably not.
Okay.
Not because the idea isn't good, because as I've said, the pyramid really resonates with me. And yeah, when I look back at teams I've been in, I can see that the teams that I've been in that have performed really well have had all of these attributes. And teams that I've been in where things have not gone well, it has all fundamentally come down to trust. So I do it does really resonate, and I really like it as an idea. But the book is about 200 odd pages, and honestly about 180 of those are this narrative with this fictional 8-person team. And I just found the narrative really uninspiring. I thought it was a little bit unrealistic. Like, I actually read it and I just thought, no one would really say that. She wouldn't
Yeah.
say that. Like, if I said that to someone, I'd be laughed at the room, not met with like, oh, what a thoughtful idea. And that was, so I really highly recommend the last 20 pages of the book. Can I say that?
Okay. Yeah.
That's where the actual idea is. But to be honest, save yourself the time from reading
And
the
the
whole book.
money, I'll just borrow your copy and read the
Yeah.
last 20 pages.
Yeah, save yourself the time, because we've talked about the core idea here, and yeah, you're busy enough.
Okay. But it reminds me of the way you've described it reminds me of Who Moved My Cheese, actually, because it's like the underlying concept is just a couple of sentences. I didn't need the parable that leads to it. I could just happily absorb the actual information. And this 5-layer pyramid doesn't seem that complicated. It doesn't seem like it requires an entire book.
It's not that complicated. I mean, he puts a bit more detail on it. Like I say, he shows you the inversion of the pyramid, so kind of what it would look like in a high performing team. He talks about some of the reasons why you might have low trust or fear of conflict. It's one of those things where if your team had good trust levels and you did feel free to disagree and there was commitment, but you weren't high performing, it probably suggests you've got an issue with your top 2 levels, which is the low standards, the not being result driven, and the avoidance of accountability. So it is helpful, I guess, in terms of diagnosing what exactly is wrong with the team. But it was just quite long, like you say. It was pretty much a pyramid with some annotation, and that would have been adequate for me personally. I just think that it's really interesting though, like, how do you build trust? And actually the narrative is all centered around a CEO coming in, and they've got this executive team who all have their own quite large departments but aren't working together well. So if you are in that situation, if that's where you are right now, then maybe you would want to read the whole narrative to see how this applies at a higher level. But I think for me, it's that people aren't ever going to want to be accountable if they're not committed, right? I mean, we've all had situations where we actually don't really want to do the thing in the first place, so you don't really want your name on the door on the ship.
Work. Yeah.
Everyone's had that situation, right? And why are people not committed? Well, because they fundamentally disagree with the direction that we're traveling in.
Yeah.
So, and the reason they disagree, and it's not that we're saying that you have to hash it out and everyone has to be happy and all has to be, total democracy or something, but it's more everyone feels like their idea has been put forward, properly listened to, properly really considered, and then the idea that is chosen reflects a lot of those views. And even if people don't fully agree with the final decision or they would have preferred something different, people can say, okay, but I do feel like I was listened to. The process of the conflict and the challenge has made me feel valued, and I understand why this was chosen. So I'm happy to jump on the bandwagon and go along with it. And so it's not always about everyone having to agree with you all the time. It's more just how can you come up with something, a final outcome that people can engage with meaningfully.
I think you really hit it with listening, though, didn't you? Because I just think that's just one of the best advices you can give to anyone working anywhere, or even in life. It's just listen to people actively listen, appear to be listening to people. So I think particularly in what we do, we tend to get this idea that we're analysing data and we've got firm, concrete answers from it. Here are my answers, so you should do the thing that my answers say that you should do. And the trouble is that what we actually produce are opinions. So we all grow up doing our maths classes and everything is got a definite answer. So we go into work thinking that it's the same in work. So we've analysed data, we've done maths, we've come up with an answer, this is the thing you should do. But it's not, it's opinions, it's a different circumstances. You could come up quite easily with other answers and people will challenge you on the answers you come up with. So I think actually listening to people, and there's no way to indicate more to people that you aren't interested in them than if you don't listen to them. It's really terrible when you can tell in a meeting or a presentation that people aren't listening. And, you know, perhaps some of that is on the presenter to be more interesting and engaging. But when people aren't engaged, it is quite insulting. Or if somebody challenges you back and you're just spending that time thinking about how you're going to tell them they're wrong once they've finished answering their question. These are just not good ways to work together with people. So yeah, so I think actually listening to lots of people, that's the best way to indicate you have trust with people and to start building up the rest of the pyramid. So
I think I just add to that is trust the fundamental thing to engagement. Like, for example, you know, if there are some people in my life who, if I was talking to them and their phone buzzed and they got out and they were answering it, you know, or they were on their phone right in front of me, I'd be like, wow, this must be really important to you. Like this, you must have something really big going on, because I trust that you wouldn't do that. You know, I wouldn't necessarily say that out loud, right? Because that would be a weird thing to say. But, you know, I have this trust that like actually they would be giving me their full attention unless that thing is really, really
it's
important.
super important.
And so, it's not that you always have to be sitting there and go, yes, I totally agree. You know, that's not what it is about, right?
Yeah.
It's about being like, this is an important conversation to have. So we're going to give the right amount of space to it. We're not going to try and rush it. We're not going to try and cram it in to a 5-minute meeting slot if people still have more opinions. But yeah, I think it's also about what you do outside of that time as well. Because if you've built up enough of that, I'm going to say trust currency. I just made that time up.
I think that's fair.
But, you know, that if you always do what you say you're going to do, and you are generally that kind of listening person, and then at the times that you can't be for whatever reason, and that happens to everyone, you know, life happens, right? So whenever that can't happen, then I think it does give you more grace for those times when you that's not possible. So I think it's about setting up that kind of habit in your life.
I see that trust builds up as a currency that you have between people, and you can then spend it on conflict, I suppose, in a way. I'm not sure about that. All right.
Do you know what? I think it's one of those difficult things, right? Because everyone knows that they should be better at listening, and everyone wants to be a trustworthy person. No one thinks of themselves as being an inherently untrustworthy person.
Yeah, true.
So I know we all want to think that we are good listeners as well. So everyone knows this is what they should be doing, and it's almost about how in a world where your phone is always buzzing and you've got emails and Teams and endless WhatsApp groups and you've got people trying to grab you as you're getting a coffee in the office and you got all this other stuff.
People who make their point in the longest roundabout way possible as well.
Yeah. How can you really make sure that you are giving the focus when it matters? That's a real challenge.
It's true, definitely. Well, it is good to know that we are comfortable with telling people not to read a book here on our first episode, especially when it's sold 3 million copies. But if it's not right for pricing professionals, then it's not right. So next time, we'll keep exploring this topic with a very good book that I read recently, which is Rebel Ideas by Matthew Said. So I'm really looking forward to talking about this one. But for now, we've got our own rebel idea, which is not to bother with 5 dysfunctions of a team. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
PriceWriters is a training and education company focused on insurance pricing. Find out more about our engaging training, graduate schemes and workshops by visiting pricewriters.com.
That was very good.